10 of the most gruesome serial killer murders. Welcome back to Creepshow, where we uncover the dark and twisted tales of history's most disturbing killers. Today, we're diving into the most gruesome serial killer murders that shocked the world. From cannibalistic cravings to unspeakable acts of violence, these stories will remind you just how terrifying the human mind can be. Stay tuned as we explore 10 of the most horrifying cases of murder committed by some of the most notorious serial killers ever known. Number 10. Richard Chase and Terry Wallen. In the late 1970s, Northern California was plagued by a deranged serial killer known as Richard Chase, or more infamously, the Vampire Killer of Sacramento. Chase was driven by a terrifying obsession with blood and cannibalism, stemming from his severe hypochondria and paranoid schizophrenia. He believed that consuming blood, first from animals, then from humans, was the only way to keep himself alive. One of his most gruesome acts took place on January 23, 1978, when Chase broke into the home of 22-year-old Terry Wallen, who was pregnant at the time. Chase murdered Wallen in a horrifyingly violent manner, stabbing her multiple times before mutilating her body. He then engaged in necrophilia, removed some of her organs, and drank her blood using a yogurt cup. The brutality of Wallen's murder, coupled with Chase's grotesque behavior, earned him his chilling nickname. His gruesome spree left Northern California in a state of fear, solidifying him as one of the most terrifying killers in modern history. Richard Chase's crimes were beyond comprehension, but this is just the beginning. The next case will leave you equally horrified. Stay tuned for more terrifying stories as we count down the most gruesome murders committed by serial killers. Number 9. Ed Kemper and Yakum Kroll. Ed Kemper was a strange kind of mama's boy. His mother was a large part of the mental problems that drove him to murder. He halted his rampage after killing her, and he stayed at her house when he committed several of his killings. Kemper also took his victims' beheaded remains home to his mom's house and hid them. He kept them for a few days while necrophiliac. One of the worst killings occurred on September 14, 1972. Kemper picked up 15-year-old Korean hitchhiker Yakum Kroll. Quickly drawing his rifle, he held the unfortunate girl hostage. Kemper strangled her on the roadside. Kemper collected victim body parts as souvenirs. After putting Kroll in his trunk, he grabbed a few beers and drove home as if nothing had occurred. Kemper had sex with Kroll's corpse at home before dissecting and chopping her up. Kemper lived with his mother. After burying Kroll's head in his mother's garden, he quipped that his mother always wanted people to look up to her. Few remains were uncovered. Number 8. William Bonin and Donald Ray Hayden. William Bonin, notoriously known as the Freeway Killer, was one of the most brutal and terrifying serial killers in California's history. Operating during the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bonin used the sprawling network of freeways in Los Angeles and Orange County to hunt, abduct, and dispose of his victims. Much like the infamous Night Stalker Richard Ramirez and the Hillside Stranglers, Angelo Buono Jr. and Kenneth Bianchi, Bonin exploited the vast, often desolate stretches of the freeway to commit his horrific acts. Bonin's killing spree claimed the lives of at least 21 boys and young men, many of whom were abducted, tortured, and killed in the most sadistic ways imaginable. One particularly horrific murder was that of 15-year-old Donald Ray Hayden on the night of August 27, 1979. Hayden was last seen alive on Santa Monica Boulevard around 1 a.m., but by the end of that day, his body was found discarded in a dumpster, brutally mutilated and assaulted. Bonin's cruelty knew no bounds. He sodomized Hayden and attempted to remove the boy's genitals while he was still alive, one of the more horrifying aspects of this murder. Bonin was known to torture his victims with ice picks and coat hangers, sometimes even strangling them with their own T-shirts. Haydn's body showed evidence of such torture, including a failed attempt to slit his throat. The sheer brutality of Bonin's crimes left an indelible mark on the communities he terrorized. The sadistic nature of William Bonin's crimes is chilling, but the horrors continue. Stay with us as we delve deeper into more gruesome murders committed by history's most depraved serial killers. Number 7. Andrei Chikatilo and Irina Pogoryalova. Andrei Chikatilo, known as the Butcher of Rostov, was one of the most infamous and sadistic serial killers in Soviet history. A cannibal, rapist, and murderer, Chikatilo preyed on young women and children, mutilating his victims with unimaginable brutality. His cold, calculated methods were as terrifying as the Russian winters, and his depravity knew no bounds. On August 11, 1986, 18-year-old Irina Pogoryalova disappeared while traveling near a farm in the Russian countryside. Her body was discovered a week later, on August 18th, showing signs of unspeakable violence. Irina's death was part of a larger string of murders that sparked a nationwide manhunt to capture Chikatilo, who had been terrorizing Russia for years. Chikatilo's treatment of Pogoryalova was particularly gruesome. Like many of his victims, she endured sexual assault and horrific mutilation. One of Chikatilo's most disturbing trademarks was his obsession with his victims' eyes. He often stabbed them during his attacks, and in some cases, he gouged them out completely. Chikatilo later confessed that he believed the eyes could retain the image of their killer, so he felt compelled to destroy them to erase any trace of his identity. Irina's body was subjected to further atrocities. Chikatilo bit her lips, mouth, and fingertips, and even consumed parts of her flesh, including her genitals. After murdering her, Chikatilo reportedly slept next to her mutilated body, indulging in his necrophilic tendencies and cannibalistic urges. The sheer level of brutality and madness that defined Chikatilo's crimes made him one of the most reviled figures in criminal history. The nightmarish acts of Andrei Chikatilo are among the darkest in the annals of true crime. But the horror doesn't end here. Stay with us as we continue our countdown of the most gruesome serial killer murders in history. Number 6. Yakum Kroll and Marion Keter. Yakum Kroll, also known as the Ruhr Hunter and the Duisburg Man-Eater, was a German serial killer and cannibal who terrorized the country for over 2 decades, murdering at least 14 people between 1955 and 1976. His final victim, 4-year-old Marion Keter, met a horrifying and grisly fate that cemented Kroll's legacy as one of the most depraved killers in history. On July 3, 1976, Kroll abducted little Marion, and what followed was a crime so cruel that it shocked even seasoned investigators. Kroll dismembered the young girl and, as with many of his previous victims, engaged in cannibalism. His predatory methods were particularly chilling. Kroll would often return to the same locations years later to commit new murders, evading detection with disturbing patience. Kroll's capture was as grotesque as his crimes. A neighbor had complained to the police about clogged pipes in their building, and Kroll casually mentioned that the issue was likely guts. This bizarre comment prompted the authorities to search his apartment, where they made the nightmarish discovery. Inside Kroll's flat, they found the dismembered remains of Marion Keter. Some of her body parts were stored in the refrigerator, while others were strewn around the apartment. Shockingly, a small hand was found cooking on the stove. True to his nature, Kroll openly confessed to everything, even acknowledging that the girl's intestines had caused the plumbing problem. Yakum Kroll's heinous acts and his chilling nonchalance in the face of such brutality left a permanent scar on Germany, and his crimes serve as a haunting reminder of how monstrous the human mind can be. Kroll's crimes are nothing short of horrifying, but the terror continues as we delve deeper into the most gruesome murders by serial killers. Stay with us as the stories only get darker from here. Number 5. Peter Kürten, Gertrude Hammacher, and Louise Lentzen. Peter Kürten, infamously known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf, was one of the most terrifying and sadistic serial killers in history. His violent impulses and sexual perversions made him a unique and horrifying case for psychiatrists of the time. A psychiatrist once referred to him as the king of sexual delinquents, unable to fully comprehend or treat the depth of his depravity. Unlike other notorious killers who targeted specific groups, Kürten murdered indiscriminately. Men, women, and children all fell prey to his brutal attacks. Among his most gruesome and heart-wrenching murders were those of Gertrude Hammacher, a 5-year-old girl, and her 14-year-old foster sister, Louise Lentzen. On August 23, 1929, the two girls attended a fair in Flehe, Germany, unaware that it would be their last night alive. As they left the fair, Kürten approached them and lured Louise away with the promise of money for cigarettes. Once separated, Kürten attacked Gertrude, brutally strangling her and slashing her throat. The young girl's death was swift and cold-blooded. Louise, returning to find her foster sister, soon met the same fate. Kürten strangled her as well, but in a grotesque escalation of violence, he went a step further, decapitating the 14-year-old. Kürten's monstrous behavior earned him the nickname the Vampire of Dusseldorf, due to his propensity to drink the blood of his victims, reveling in their pain and suffering. His ability to kill so viciously and without distinction, whether young or old, man or woman, left the people of Germany paralyzed with fear during his reign of terror. Peter Kürten's reign as one of history's most vicious killers leaves a lasting horror, but the darkest tales of terror are still to come. Stay with us as we continue to count down the most gruesome serial killer murders. Number 4. John Wayne Gacy and John Butkovich. John Wayne Gacy, also known as Pogo the Clown, is one of the most notorious and chilling serial killers in American history. His outward persona as a friendly, slightly overweight clown who performed at children's parties made him all the more terrifying when the world discovered his dark and twisted side. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy murdered 33 boys and young men, often luring them with promises of work or money before subjecting them to unspeakable horrors. One of Gacy's most disturbing murders was that of 17-year-old John Butkovich in 1975. Butkovich worked for Gacy's construction company but had a falling out with his boss over unpaid wages. After confronting Gacy about the money, Butkovich disappeared. His fate, like that of many others, was sealed by the predatory nature of a man who used his position of trust to deceive and destroy. Gacy had a grotesque routine for subduing his victims, using tricks from his clown persona. One of his most infamous tricks was the handcuff trick, where Gacy would convince his victims to allow themselves to be restrained under the guise of a magic trick. Once they were helpless, the sadistic side of Gacy emerged. He would strangle them with their own clothing, brutally rape them, and torture them in unimaginable ways. John Butkovich's final moments were agonizing. Gacy tortured him, sitting on his chest and choking him before finally stabbing him in the chest. Gacy's ability to mask his monstrous nature behind a clown's makeup only heightened the terror he inflicted on his victims and the public alike. John Wayne Gacy's gruesome murders have haunted the nation for decades, and the chilling details continue to shock true crime enthusiasts. But the horrors aren't over yet. Stay with us as we dive deeper into the most gruesome serial killer murders in history. Number 3. Jeffrey Dahmer and Konarak Syntha Somphone. Jeffrey Dahmer's name is almost synonymous with cannibal. Anyone alive in 1991 remembers the iconic footage of authorities taking body parts, dismembered corpses, and the infamous big blue barrels in which he dissolved human bodies in acid from his home. His victims' family shouted and screamed about how much they despised him during his trial. Choosing one of Dahmer's 17 horrible murders as the most gruesome is difficult. A jury judged him sane and fit to stand trial is almost unbelievable. However, the murder of 14-year-old Laotian Konarak Synthasamphone is particularly disturbing. Of course, the victim's age contributes to the crime's tragedy. It's extremely disappointing to discover that Konarak had a chance to avoid a brazen murder that makes us doubt our authorities' efficacy and what more we can do to catch these monsters. Dahmer generally lured men and boys to his Milwaukee apartment with money for nude pictures, intercourse, or both. Dahmer enticed Konarak into his home in 1991 and drugged him as usual. Dahmer then passed out from alcohol. After waking up to find the teenager gone, Dahmer charged outside his flat. 3 people found the injured, bewildered, naked youngster in the streets. Police were summoned by concerned women. Dahmer told police that the youngster was his young girlfriend, that they were fighting, and that the boy had accidentally drunk too much. He convinced police of everything, including that the youngster was old enough to drink. After the police returned Dahmer and the youngster to his flat, Dahmer readily offered nude images of the boy as proof of their relationship. Since Konarak was too high to converse, the police didn't know he was 14 and had posed for the images for money. Even after finding a bleeding, shackled, naked youngster in the street, the cops let him go to his murderer. The woman protested afterward. "Officer, ma'am, I can't make it clearer. Everything is handled. He's in his boyfriend's flat. Yep. I'm as optimistic as possible. I can't change someone's sexuality." Dahmer gave his victims frontal lobotomies to create mindless sex zombies for fun. Dahmer strangled Konarak after twice failing to perform a chemical lobotomy, then had sex with, dismembered, and ate some of his corpse. The rest of the youngster was dissolved in a large blue acid barrel. Number 2. Richard Spec and the 1966 Nurses. Richard Spec's murder spree stands out not only for the sheer number of victims, but also for the shocking brutality that unfolded in one horrifying night. On July 13, 1966, Spec made history as one of the most prolific killers of the era by murdering 8 young women in a single evening, earning him a notorious place in the annals of crime. Spec, a drifter with a violent history of theft, assault, and drug and alcohol addiction, was no stranger to trouble. His criminal past, paired with a volatile temperament, created a deadly combination that culminated in one of the most chilling mass murders in American history. On that fateful summer night in Chicago, Spec broke into a dormitory for student nurses. Inside, 9 women were living together, preparing for their shift the next day. Spec, wielding a knife, bound and gagged his victims one by one, leading them into separate rooms. Over the course of hours, he sadistically tortured, beat, raped, and killed 8 of the 9 women. The women were systematically strangled, stabbed, and mutilated. In a rare stroke of luck, one of the young nurses, Cora Amurao, managed to hide under a bed, surviving the massacre by staying out of sight. It was her testimony that would later lead to Spec's conviction. Spec's rampage shocked the nation, not only for its brutality, but also for the fact that he had methodically taken his time, savagely ending the lives of 8 innocent women. After the murders, Spec attempted to flee and, following a failed suicide attempt, was taken to a hospital where a nurse recognized his infamous "Born to Raise Hell" tattoo, a key piece of evidence that linked him to the crime. Cora Amurao's identification of Spec as the killer sealed his fate. Spec was sentenced to life in prison, where he would spend the rest of his days. His case left an indelible mark on America's understanding of mass murderers and serial killers, showing just how deadly one man's depravity could be. Richard Spec's massacre of the 1966 nurses remains one of the most horrifying mass killings in history, but even darker and more twisted murders lie ahead. Stay with us as we unveil the final case in our countdown of the most gruesome serial killer murders. Number 1. Albert Fish and Grace Budd. Albert Fish, often referred to as the Boogeyman or the Brooklyn Vampire, is one of the most horrifying serial killers in history, and the murder of 10-year-old Grace Budd stands as the most gruesome and chilling of all his crimes. Fish's depraved actions blurred the lines between madness and pure evil, making his story one of the darkest ever told. In 1928, Fish lured Grace Budd away from her family under the pretense of taking her to a birthday party. Her family had met Fish after he responded to a newspaper ad placed by Grace's brother Edward, who was seeking work. Fish, posing as a kindly old man named Frank Howard, quickly won over the Budd family, offering Edward a job and convincing Grace's parents to allow her to accompany him to the supposed party. Tragically, they had no idea what horrors awaited their daughter. Grace never returned home. Fish took her to an abandoned house in Westchester County, where he subjected her to unimaginable torture before killing her. What makes this case even more horrifying is the letter that Fish later sent to Grace's mother, detailing the sickening acts he committed. In this letter, Fish graphically described how he strangled, dismembered, and cannibalized Grace's body. The contents of the letter were so disturbing that it became infamous, and portions of it have haunted readers for decades. An excerpt from Fish's letter reads, "I took her to an empty house in Westchester. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run down the stairs. I choked her to death, then cut her into small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little body was, roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body." Fish's crimes were unspeakably heinous, and this letter was instrumental in leading the police to his capture. When they searched the house where Grace had been killed, authorities found bones and evidence of other children who had met similarly horrific fates at the hands of Fish. Albert Fish was convicted of Grace Budd's murder and was executed in 1936. His name remains synonymous with the most twisted and depraved acts of cruelty, and his gruesome legacy continues to chill the hearts of true crime followers. Albert Fish's murder of Grace Budd is a reminder of the absolute darkest depths of human depravity, and it's a case that still haunts the annals of true crime. If you found this story as unsettling as we did, let us know in the comments, and stay tuned for more spine-chilling episodes of Creepshow. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the shadows. Until next time, stay safe, and remember to always keep one eye open in the dark. That was 10 of the most gruesome serial killer murders in history. It's chilling to think about the depths of depravity that some individuals can sink to. If these stories shook you, let us know which one left you the most horrified in the comments. And if you want more true crime stories that venture deep into the shadows, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode of Creepshow. Until next time, stay safe, and keep your eyes open to the darkness around us.